humanity and the earth. For a time immemorial we have been together, spiraling through the cosmos on our inseparable journeys of growth and expansion. Through the rise and fall of countless ages, man has had its impact and influences on the earth and its inhabitants, just as the earth has had her own influences on the life and learning of man. And though to many these cycles of creation and destruction, of birth, life, death, and rebirth may seem both cruel and meaningless, there are an increasing number of people around the world who are coming to realize that everything that comes in the planet's life, and in the life of man, exists to serve a divine purpose. Awakening to the fact that all of the health, wealth, power, and pleasure that one attains during the course of their life will one day be taken away in an instant, either during their lifetime or at the moment of death, and that all they have acquired for themselves in the material will be lost to them forever. These perceptive members of humanity have come to see that the quest for happiness through material attainment is nothing more than a chasing of the wind. For not only will a lifetime spent seeking happiness through temporary material pleasures fail to provide lasting happiness, but it is a path that has also proven itself to be the source of much suffering. For one who relies on something temporary as the sole source of their happiness ensures that they will suffer when that temporary something either passes away or is no longer available to them. With this understanding of the folly of seeking happiness through temporary material means, many wise members of humanity are realizing that in order to achieve true, everlasting peace and happiness, they must turn their focus from temporary material goals to eternal spiritual growth. Thus aware of the fact that the only thing that one gets to keep when they pass away are the qualities that have been etched into their souls, as their repetitive decision to act in accordance with their beliefs serves to reinforce those beliefs in the deepest fiber of their being. These people have made the development of their souls their sole purpose for living. For just as a farmer who plants only lemon trees in his orchard will get nothing but bitter lemons, so too does a soul whose thoughts, words, and deeds are continually planting the bitter seeds of greed, hatred, and ignorance ensure that that soul's life will always be full of those same bitter fruits. While one whose journey of soul development eventually reveals to them truths and perspectives that encourage and enable them to respond to all of the beings and events of life with peace and love, will thereby effectively scatter seeds of those same qualities in the orchard of their existence, whose sweet fruits they may continue to enjoy as they blossom throughout their life. With this understanding that the purpose of life is to grow as a soul rather than to gain for the self, these people are learning to see with eyes of spirit beyond conventional concepts of good and bad, as they realize that all that exists and occurs in life is necessary for the soul's growth and development. Guided by that still, small voice inside which they strive to hear above the din and distraction of our modern world, and heeding the words and ways of those who before them have walked the ancient paths, this small portion of humanity has found renewed purpose in the liberating discovery that one's progress on the path of soul evolution is not measured in units of fame, riches, or material comfort, but rather the degree of one's success on the spirit side of life is measured by the amount of peace and ease that one has in the face of all of life's challenges and triumphs. For one who through spiritual endeavor has developed a sufficient love, will, and wisdom that enables them to be at peace with all of the joys and pains of life, has reached the heights of heavenly peace, a state in which the aspirant realizes that heaven is not an external place where all of one's sensual desires are fulfilled, but rather it is an internal state of mind that allows one to be truly happy with whatever comes in life. That said, it is essential to understand here that this does not mean that what one does or what happens in the material world does not matter. On the contrary, the level of peace and spiritual growth attained by the aspirant can only be demonstrated, tested, and perfected by giving the aspirant the opportunity to physically act in response to the events that occur in their lives. For it is easy for one to say that love is the way, peace is the way, sacrifice is the way. But it is only through their actions that they may truly demonstrate the depth of peace, love, and willingness to sacrifice that they have attained through their spiritual work, and thus reveal the true quality of their souls. And it is because of the unique ability that our actions have to reveal the true quality of our souls that we have been told numerous times throughout the Bible that we will be judged by our actions. And though this concept of salvation through deeds goes directly against the belief of many misguided Christians, one has only to read the words of God's own prophets, such as those given to us by Paul in his letter to the Romans, to see the truth. For Paul, speaking to the Romans, says, "In the obstinate impenitence of your heart, you are laying up for yourself a store of retribution, when God's judgment will be revealed. And he will pay everyone according to what he has done. To those who pursue glory, honor, and immortality by steady persistence in well-doing, he will give eternal life. But the retribution of his wrath awaits those who are governed by selfish ambition, who refuse obedience to truth and take evil for their guide. For though it is a fine soul indeed that is able to enjoy the sweet-tasting fruits of peace and wisdom that have begun to blossom in the orchard of life as a result of its spiritual efforts, it is essential to understand here that that soul will only be allowed to ripen to its finest quality if it is willing to share the sweet sustenance of its fruits with others. In accordance with this truth, one who aspires to greater spiritual peace and freedom will be required to demonstrate the advanced state of their spiritual love, will, and wisdom by extending that desire for peace outwards to the earth and all living beings. For one whose spiritual growth has allowed them to see and respect the spirit that resides in all things will never cause the harm of another in order to secure the pleasure, success, or survival of the physical self. And so as a result, anyone professing to be a true spiritual aspirant will be required to demonstrate their love of spirit over material rewards by making a conscious effort to stop performing actions that cause the suffering of others, while at the same time they must seek to perform actions that help alleviate the suffering of others which already exists. And it is because our purpose in life is to grow in spirit and perfect peace that we are given the ups and downs of life. For just as the muscles of the body need resistance to strengthen them and make them grow, so too does the spiritual seeker require ever greater outer conflict in order to aspire to increasingly perfect inner peace. Just as unshakable faith is given wings only when one chooses to trust, despite their doubts and the worries of others. And limitless love can only be born in the presence of extreme pain, oppression, and hatred. The truth of this concept that humanity needs the conflicts and crises of life to assist its spiritual evolution, and thus its very purpose for being, may be more easily understood by considering the mystery of how pain and hatred are needed to give life to divine love, which then has the power to open the pathway to perfect peace. For if one can consider that a person who gives love only to those who show love to them demonstrates a selfish, limited love, then they may also come to see that it is only by experiencing the strife and suffering caused by the hatred and ignorance of others that the seeker is then given the opportunity to climb to love's higher heights of unconditional love, compassion, and forgiveness. And when one thus awakens to the spiritual purpose of all things, including those beings and events that they once considered dark or even evil, their hearts may be filled with a gratitude that then leads to love and eventually perfect peace, as they realize that all of the pains and joys of life are lovingly urging them towards that deeper state of inner calm. Aware of this, although the rising intensity of current economic, socio-political, and environmental events on the global stage may stir feelings of fear, frustration, and the belief that things are about as bad as they could get amongst the general population, these awakening ones are coming to understand that all of the joys, hardships, and the lessons that accompany them have only existed to prepare them for the even greater challenges and evolutionary triumphs yet to come. For in accordance with the fact that many of life's greatest lessons come from its greatest hardships, humanity and the earth are now entering a heightened phase of activity and intensity on their mutual journey of growth and learning. And it will be the events, outcomes, and resulting revelations that come from this impending period of great change and challenge that will elevate the race of man to the next level of its spiritual evolution by opening humanity's consciousness to a new way of seeing and being in the world. This prophesied period of great challenge and transformation, which will forever change humanity's experience of life on Earth and in the universe, is known to many as the testing time, and it is about to begin. However, just as a child needs to be tested before graduating to a new level of schooling, so too will the race of man be required to face a series of tests and trials to demonstrate its readiness to move on to a new experience of life and the challenges and rewards it presents, all of which will eventually bring humanity to the next successive grade of learning and experience, which will then give way to the next level, and then the next, and so on, until at some point the entire human consciousness is cleansed of all of the false perspectives that prevent it from clearly seeing and abiding by the living light and love of truth. Thus, in accordance with the perspective that the sole purpose for human existence is to evolve our collective consciousness and spirit, it is essential to understand that in order for humanity to successfully navigate the testing times and thereby graduate to the next level of experience, each and every successful graduate will be required to break away from the conventional reactions of the general populace and find entirely new responses to the increasingly intense challenges and trials of the testing times. For one who responds to the upcoming tests by applying the same material-minded consciousness demonstrated by the mass population, will reveal that they are still operating by that limited consciousness, rather than forging ahead and laying a foundation for new spirit-based thoughts and actions, which would enable them to transcend humanity's outdated patterns and perspectives. With this understanding that the obvious responses to the trials of the testing time will be guided by the same material obsession that has been programmed into the minds of the mass population, it is our intention with this video to not only demonstrate how those typical responses reflect the old consciousness that would keep humanity locked in its limited experience of existence. But we will also present some alternative, not so obvious responses, which reflect a more evolved spiritual perspective, capable of helping true aspirants successfully navigate the coming trials, and thereby demonstrate their readiness to graduate to a new experience of life. That said, it is important to understand here that to the average person still looking at life through the commonly accepted perspectives of the general population, which is focused on the success and survival of the material self, the spirit-based responses to the challenges of the testing time presented in this film will seem sometimes cold, often crazy, and even evil, because they are so far removed from the popular beliefs that are maintained in the minds of the general population. And so, it is out of our love for the truth and all living beings that we risk the probability of looking cold, crazy, and evil, so that we may offer the following presentation as a guiding light to help fellow seekers find the path that, if followed, may lead them through the trials of the testing time to greater spiritual development and to that perfect peace which defies description. Having considered the perspective that the purpose of life is to grow in spirit and perfect peace, and that in order to do so, we require both the challenges and triumphs of life and the testing times, it is essential to understand that in order to successfully navigate the coming tribulations, and thereby demonstrate one's level of spiritual progress, each and every human being will be required to make a choice. And it will be each individual's actions during the trials of the testing times that will, in simplest terms, reveal their choice of whether they place more importance on saving their temporary material selves or their eternal spiritual souls. For if it can be considered that humanity's current consciousness is centered mainly on acquiring material objects and objectives, geared towards pleasuring and protecting the physical self, regardless of the suffering caused to the earth or others, then we may also see that in order to demonstrate one's readiness to evolve past this outmoded, material-obsessed consciousness, sincere devotees will be required to demonstrate their commitment to spirit by making choices and performing actions during the trials of the testing time that actively reveal the importance they place on the salvation of their soul over that of the physical self. With this understanding of how the quality of each individual soul will be determined by our individual choice of whether we will place more importance on saving our material selves or our spiritual souls, it is important to understand here that anyone who wishes to graduate to a more expanded spiritual existence will be required to demonstrate their readiness for that exalted spiritual life by faithfully meeting death and the destruction of much of the material world during the coming trials of the testing times. For the most effective way to determine whether or not one would sell their soul to save their life is to bring them to the brink of death and then let them choose. And it is for this reason that during the 3.5 years of great tribulations which accompany the testing time, the entire planet and all living beings upon it will be faced with the possibility of death and global-wide destruction, during which we will all be given the opportunity to demonstrate through our actions whether we place more value on the physical self or the eternal soul. And though the ideals of many will make the choice seem an easy one, the events of the testing time have been specifically designed to be so intense that they will override the ambitious ideals of most, and thereby force a reaction in the midst of the severe experiences which will reveal the true nature of one's soul. For once again, it is easy to say that peace is the way and sacrifice is the way. But it is not until one is surrounded by death that they will see what depths they are willing to sink to cling to life. Just as one who is surrounded on all sides by evil and selfishness will be given the opportunity to see it so clearly that they may then be inspired to perform actions of love and sacrifice. And as discussed before, it is this unique ability that our actions have to reveal the truth of our souls that has led the prophets themselves to tell us that we will, all of us, be judged by our actions. As revealed in the words of Ezekiel, who speaking for the Lord said, "I, the Lord, have spoken. The time has come for me to act. I will not hold back. I will not have pity, nor will I relent. You will be judged according to your conduct and your actions, declares the Sovereign Lord." And for any of those so-called Christians who would still deny the truth that we are to be judged by our actions, we would urge you to pay heed to the words of Jesus himself, who said, "For an hour is coming in which all who are in the tombs will hear his voice and will come forth. Those who did the good deeds to a resurrection of life, those who committed the evil deeds to a resurrection of judgment." Despite hearing of the necessary role of global death and destruction to reveal the soul's quality, there are a few, even amongst those who would consider themselves prophets, who, although they believe that change is coming, are convinced that it will be gradual, with no far-reaching damage or consequences. But what these people fail to realize is that the trials of the testing time will serve to birth an entirely new consciousness for humanity. And just as the pains and discomfort of childbirth increase slowly over the 9-month gestation period, so too will the changes and challenges leading to the birth of humanity's new consciousness increase gradually over time, until one day the water will break, the contractions will start, and the true labor, along with all of its joys and pains, will begin. Though the truth of the sudden and extreme nature of the testing times is made plain in the words of the prophets who say, "The end will come like a woman in labor, in great pain," there are still those who are unable to accept just how intense and dramatic these prophesied days of great change will be. That said, for all those who are hoping for a smooth, painless transition into a new world of light and love, they would do well to realize that the truth of the extreme nature of the coming trials, whose great pains and physical loss have been divinely designed to inspire the willing to rise to new spiritual heights, is reflected in the words of the Christ through Jesus, who, speaking of the testing times, said, "It will be a time of great distress, such as there has never been before since the beginning of the world, and will never be again." For it can only be amidst the global-wide life and death scenarios of the testing times that every human being will be able to truly demonstrate through their actions whether they choose to be ruled by fear and the selfish desire to save the self, or will they strengthen and reveal their spiritual resolve by acting with faith and love and a desire that all beings should live in peace. Meanwhile, it is the words of Jesus himself, along with the patterns laid out in the events of his life and death, that reveal the path by which all successful candidates may walk, if they wish to successfully navigate the trials of the testing times. For Jesus said, "If anyone wishes to come after me, he must deny himself, take up his cross daily, and follow me." Here we see that anyone who wishes to follow the path set out by Jesus, that leads to the heights of spirit blessedness, will, in accordance with his love of spirit, be required to put aside concerns of the material self, so that they may face and be perfected by the trials of life and the testing times. Just as Jesus himself was perfected by faithfully facing the trials and tortures of his crucifixion with a heart full of love. For the testing time will be a time of great challenge and chaos, and there will be much confusion amongst the masses during the times of tribulation. So much so, in fact, that we have been warned that even God's elect could be deceived if they had not been graced with God's own guidance. For even though the wise, the loving, and the faithful elect will, by the wisdom graced to them by God and their desire to serve others, be shown the way, the true path that they walk through the testing time will be so different from that walked by the vast majority that it will cause those with even the slightest doubt to stray and lose their way. And it is because of the oh so subtle and tricky nature of the trials and tribulations of the testing times that at the end of every major world cycle, various nations around the world are given great souls such as the Christ through Jesus, born to the Hebrews, whose thoughts, words, and deeds reveal the way to faith and perfect peace for man. And it is because the life and death of masters such as Jesus are meant as a pattern to help those willing members of humanity successfully transition through the testing times that he said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." However, there is today much confusion surrounding the words and teachings of the Christ as they relate to the testing times, which threatens to endanger the well-intentioned efforts of many so-called Christians who wish to follow Christ and achieve the elevated heights of heavenly peace. One of the most common and therefore dangerous misconceptions surrounding the teachings of Christ that is sure to lead many astray during the trials of the testing times is centered around the mystery of how Christ saves. For contrary to the popular belief of many so-called Christians, Jesus' words, "I am the way, the truth, and the life, no one comes to the Father but through me," does not mean that in order for one to successfully navigate the testing times and have everlasting life, all they have to do is believe in Jesus the man. The mere idea that someone could totally disregard the faith and love displayed in the teachings of Jesus and murder, judge, and lie to as many people as they want without facing spiritual consequence simply because they believe in Jesus or praise his name is a dangerous and ridiculous notion. One that is refuted by the Apostle James, whose words, "Thou believest that there is one God, thou doest well. But the devils also believe and tremble," prove that simply believing in God or Jesus is not enough to save one from being a devil, if a devil is what they are. Truly, Jesus did not want his followers to love and worship him so that they may be saved, but rather he urged his disciples to save themselves, that is, their souls, not their bodies, by following his examples of words, thoughts, and deeds, and demonstrating through their actions an unconditional love and respect for all. For in order to be a true child of God, one must learn to live and love as Jesus did. A truth that is revealed in the words of the Apostle John, who said, "Those who say they abide in God should live their lives as Jesus did." Similarly, it will only be by doing what Jesus did and following the examples laid out in the patterns, words, and deeds made visible in the life and death of Jesus that one will be able to successfully navigate the trials of the testing times and thereby follow Christ to the state of exalted spirit blessedness. The truth of which he revealed himself when he said, "I tell you the truth, anyone who believes in me will do the same works I have done, and even greater works, because I am going to be with the Father. This startling verse reveals with undeniable clarity the mystery of how true believers in Christ will not perish but have everlasting life, as promised in the often quoted but little understood verse of John 3:16. However, in accordance with Jesus' words which say, "Anyone who believes in me will do the same works I have done," we may see that true believers in Christ must demonstrate that belief not by kneeling in a church and muttering half-hearted prayers, or by making offerings of money or missions in an effort to save themselves, but rather a true believer in Christ must demonstrate that belief by following the examples of love, wisdom, and selfless service made visible in the thoughts, words, and deeds of Jesus as they were performed during the events of his life and death. And let it be known that all of the great deeds performed by the Christ through Jesus, which served to set him apart from the rest of humanity, were performed with a single-minded desire to save and serve the eternal Spirit, rather than the material self. For it was the boundless love of Christ for the Spirit that he saw in all living beings that drove him to live a life of selfless sacrifice. And it was that same love that caused him to make his life a willing sacrifice, not so that people could be forgiven for their sins and keep on sinning, but so that they could see from his example how they might raise themselves out of the pits of self and sin, by replacing their desires for material pleasure and fulfillment with a spirit-based desire for the peace and freedom of all. And it was this same commitment to save the eternal soul over the physical self that enabled Jesus to love and pray for the forgiveness of those who brought him pain and death, because he saw the necessary part that their violence played in allowing him to perfect himself, by urging him towards love's higher planes of peace, compassion, and forgiveness. And so, if one can acknowledge that it is the Christ's capacity to surrender the desires of the physical self in order to save and serve the eternal soul, which demonstrates how one may successfully navigate the trials of the testing time, then they may also see that the pre-programmed decision to save the material self over the eternal soul, which will be demonstrated by the vast majority of the material-minded population during the trials of the testing times, will reveal their conscious choice to succumb to the material temptations of Lucifer, which will thereby prevent them from successfully transitioning to a heightened state of spiritual experience. For if the selfless qualities demonstrated in the life and death of Jesus are meant to show us the way to the sublime heights of spirit blessedness, by urging us to embody the essence of Christ's consciousness, then we may come to see that the self-serving desire to live solely for the material protection and pleasuring of the physical self represents the contradictory consciousness of the Luciferian doctrine, whose false yet tempting illusions exist to try to keep people trapped in the pain and suffering of their material-minded existence. With this understanding, we may then see that the choice that will be presented to each one of us during the trials and tribulations of the testing times will in essence reveal whether we choose to follow the examples demonstrated by Christ and thereby save our souls, or will we choose to succumb to the material temptations of Lucifer by striving to save the physical self at the expense of our eternal selves and souls. And though mention of the contradictory characters of the Christ and Lucifer will conjure images of two great warriors rising for the long-awaited battle of Armageddon in the minds of many viewers, it is essential to understand here that although the world will most certainly be consumed by war and chaos during the testing times, the true battle of Armageddon is a war that can only be won within. For amidst the challenges of the testing times, although a war against two great forces will rage across the face of the earth, the only war that has the power to truly save will be the war that is fought and won in the hearts and souls of humanity. For the pains and horrors suffered during the testing times will, in accordance with the quality of each person's soul, cause them to act in alignment with either the selfless, love-based consciousness of Christ or the self-serving fear and hatred of Lucifer. And it will be each person's choice of which consciousness they will embody during the coming trials that will determine whether the Christ or Lucifer is the winner of their own inner war. That said, it is essential to understand here that the only power that Lucifer has is the ability to distract one from reaching their greatest spiritual potential by tempting them with their lesser material desires. A truth that is evidenced in the story of the three temptations of Christ in the wilderness. In this story, Jesus had reached the sublime heights of spiritual awareness after 40 days of fasting and praying in the wilderness. And as he was on the verge of conquering self, he was met by the adversary with three final tests and material temptations that would determine if he had indeed conquered his limiting physical self and its petty desires. First, Satan tempted Jesus by suggesting that he use his miraculous God-given powers to turn stones to bread so that he could feed his physical self. Second, the adversary told Jesus to throw his body from a great height so that God could send his angels to save Jesus' body from physical harm. And third, Satan stood with Jesus at the top of a mountain and showing him the whole world told Jesus to bend his knee and worship him so that they might rule the material world together. As the story goes, the Christ reveals the way through the testing times and to true spirit blessedness by denying Satan's material temptations for food, power, and pleasure. Similarly, during the trials of the testing times, each one of us will be necessarily tempted in various ways with the desire to place the salvation of the physical self over that of the eternal soul. For the material intensity and horrors of the testing time will make the path leading to spiritual peace and fulfillment difficult for most to see, as those who lack an awareness of spirit will be guided solely by the seemingly sensible temptation to save themselves and those they love at any cost, including causing the suffering of others. However, what so few people understand is that in accordance with Lucifer's desire to keep humanity bound to the material reality, the tricks and traps of the testing time have been specifically designed to trigger humanity's pre-programmed responses to either kill or be killed that would be most popular amongst the mass population, which would then, in accordance with each individual's willingness to harm another to save the self, demonstrate their choice to place the physical self over the eternal soul. While on a more subtle note, which we will go into greater detail later, those whose material-minded desire to save the self at any cost will also be given the choice to deny their spiritual truths by swearing loyalty to a seemingly spiritual being and new governing authority that, like Lucifer, will make promises to fulfill the material desires of man for renewed peace, prosperity, and protection in the wake of the coming destruction. And thus, all those who deny their spiritual truths to save their material selves will by their actions demonstrate that they place more importance in saving their material selves than they do their eternal souls. Meanwhile, those who, amidst the challenges of the testing times, wish to demonstrate their readiness to advance to a more expanded, spirit-based purpose for existence will show their readiness by performing actions that intend to bring only increasing peace to the self and others during the tribulations. And though a person's choice to forego violence in the face of famine will seem crazy to most, The true spiritual aspirant will see the senselessness in harming the eternal soul to save the temporary self, which is sure to die at some point on its own anyway. And so with this understanding, that both in life and the testing times, Lucifer aims to deceive and corrupt the souls of true spiritual aspirants by tempting them to turn from their efforts of soul to their lesser desires for the material self. It is essential to realize here that the efforts of Lucifer, along with all those that we would consider dark or evil during the trials of the testing time, serve the necessary role of facilitating our spiritual evolution. For it will be through the process of facing and learning to faithfully navigate the intense challenges of the testing times with an evolved awareness of their spiritual purpose that the souls of true seekers will be purified and perfected. Thus, the challenges must be great to effect great changes in the souls of the successful candidates. For one who is graced with glimmers of peace while faithfully facing unimaginable horrors, will have that faith and peace increased through their willingness to exercise those qualities. While one who in the midst of the testing times continues to fearfully focus on meeting their material desires for the self, even at the expense of harming others, will see their fear and desire increase to the point that they will be incapable of demonstrating a faith or love sufficient to free them from their current experience of life. This truth of the divine purpose of the testing time to purify and improve the souls of true spiritual aspirants, while revealing the wickedness of material desire, is reflected in the words of the prophet Daniel, who said, "Many will be purified, cleansed, and refined by these trials, but the wicked will continue in their wickedness, and none of them will understand. Only those who are wise will know what it means." And the wise, heeding the words of the Christ through Jesus, and seeing the divine purpose of everything that comes in their life and the testing times, will understand that in order to successfully navigate the challenges, they will be required to meet all that comes with a heart full of faith and love, as demonstrated by Jesus during his own trials. For it is the unconditional love that Jesus displayed when he prayed and asked the Creator to forgive those who were crucifying him, which alone has the power to truly save. And it is the exclusive power of this faith-born love to save the soul during life and the testing times that is reflected in the words of Christ himself, who said, "You will then be handed over for punishment and execution. All nations will hate you for your allegiance to me. At that time many will fall from their faith. They will betray one another and hate one another. Many false prophets will arise and mislead many. And as lawlessness spreads, the love of many will grow cold. But whoever endures in their love to the end will be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all the nations, and then the end will come. So let it be known that it is love that saves, and Christ consciousness is the unconditional love of all that was demonstrated through the words and deeds of Jesus during the events of his life and death. And all those who can embody that consciousness and follow the examples of Christ, loving all as Jesus did, will resurrect the Christ within and thereby find salvation. And yet it is because so few will be able to hold on to their love for all during the trials of the testing times, which will inspire the majority of humanity to act in accordance with their self-serving motivations of fear, anger, and hatred, that the path of love and sacrifice set down by Christ is referred to as the narrow path. However, it is because of the necessity for one to find and follow the narrow path, if they wish for salvation of the soul, that the Christ through Jesus speaking to his followers said, "Enter by the narrow gate, For wide is the gate and broad the road that leads to destruction, and many enter that way. While narrow is the gate and constricted the road that leads to life, and those who find them are few. And so we pray that these words and this message may reach the hearts of the willing, and thereby inspire each of you to enter by the narrow gate, so that you may peacefully accept whatever comes during the trials and tribulations of the testing times with a heart full of love and selflessness, as demonstrated in the life and death of the man named Jesus, who came to show the way to life and perfect peace for man. And amidst the dark days, take comfort in the fact that though the road is narrow, you are never alone. For in addition to the love of Christ and the Creator, you will also have the love of your true brothers and sisters, who though you may not see them at the time, are also faithfully walking the narrow path along with you, willing as you are to live and die with a heart full of faith, love, and forgiveness. With the understanding that all that they see and experience during the trials of the testing times, regardless of how seemingly dark and demonic, is lovingly urging them home. It is for you, our true brothers and sisters, that we send this message, with the intention of exposing some of the subtle tricks and traps of the testing time, so that together we may successfully navigate the challenges ahead, and thereby light the way for others. And so now, let us examine 3 false perceptions surrounding the testing times regarding the false fight, the false rapture, and the false Messiah, which have been pre-programmed so deeply into the minds of the mass population that they will cause many people who believe and act according to these lies to be led astray, and thereby kept from finding the true path that would allow them to successfully navigate the testing times. As the increasingly intense events of the testing time unfold, escalating beyond common everyday crises to the climactic chaos and destruction caused by the prophesied return of the Great Red Planet, referred to in the Bible as the Red Serpent of old, there are many purposefully laid tricks and traps which will be sprung on each and every member of humanity in order to determine whether or not each of us has sufficiently developed the spiritual qualities of faith, love, wisdom, and will to safely guide us through the upcoming trials and challenges. For in accordance with the wisdom and mercy of the Creator's universal law of karmic returns, which states that each of us will reap what we sow, those who throughout their lives have placed all importance on pursuing self-serving material desires instead of perfecting themselves through dedicated spiritual seeking, will lack the necessary love and insights that would enable them to successfully navigate the upcoming trials. For the law of karma tells us that a field of stones can yield only stones, meaning that if one does not make the effort to till the soil of the soul and to plant the life-giving seeds of love and wisdom within it, then their soul will forever remain a barren field. Meanwhile, all those who do plant life-giving seeds within their souls will then be required to expend the continued care and energy to keep the garden of their spirits watered and free from weeds, or their bountiful crop will be lost due to their lack of effort. However, in accordance with the mercy of Great Spirit, all those who continually focus their efforts on seeking communion with the Creator through a true spiritual practice, and by studying the words of wisdom gifted to us through the sacred text, will, through their efforts and the grace of God, be granted the necessary peace and perspectives that will enable them to faithfully flow through the trials of the testing times with a heart full of love and acceptance, as demonstrated by the Christ in the stories surrounding the life and death of Jesus. For just as a person who invests the time and energy into the planting and care of a garden will reap the rewards of their work, so too will those whose spiritual seeking has opened their hearts to the love and acceptance of all be blessed with the ability to find peace amidst the darkness and despair of the prophesied days of tribulation. While all those who throughout their lives have sought comfort and safety only in material objects and the institutions of man, will, as a result of their material dependency, end up suffering great pain and uncertainty when much of the material world that they have come to love and depend on is lost during the death and destruction of the testing times. And it will be in the midst of this sudden and sweeping destruction that humanity will be given the opportunity to see the true worthlessness of money, governments, and material possessions, all of which will fail to provide any lasting comfort or happiness during the testing times. While at the same time the horrors of the coming trials and tribulations will also reveal the unique power that spiritual communion has to provide true, lasting peace amidst the madness and chaos of the coming days of darkness. And it will be thus, through each human being's choice of whether they wish to save the material self or the spiritual soul, and the resulting revelation surrounding the outcome of their choices, which will then serve to sift and purify the souls of humanity, revealing whether or not one has sufficiently developed their spiritual self to the level that they may successfully navigate the testing times and thereby graduate to a new level of spiritual experience. However, heeding Jesus' words, who warned us about the deceptive nature of the testing times when he said, "False messiahs and false prophets will arise, performing signs and wonders so miraculous so as to deceive, if that were possible, even God's chosen ones." It is our intention with this presentation to reveal some of the subtle tricks and traps that are so deceptive they could serve to hinder the efforts of even the most devout and practiced spiritual aspirants as they attempt to navigate their way through the testing times. And so, for those with the ears to hear and the eyes to see, we will now step off the wide path of commonly accepted belief and enter the narrow gate where we will explore and reveal some subtle and unseen deceptions of the testing times as they relate to the false fight, the false rapture, and the false Messiah, whose deceptions will serve to mislead many unwary souls during the coming days of great change and challenge. May our exploration of the following tricks and traps serve to assist you through the coming trials. One of the false perceptions that will threaten to lead many people astray during the trials of the testing times is a pre-programmed belief that humanity's salvation will depend on which side rises as the victor in an epic final battle between the forces of light and dark, which many people have come to know as the Battle of Armageddon. However, what so few people understand is that the belief that humanity's peace and salvation will be determined by the outcome of an external war, which takes place on the battlefields of man, is a trap that has been planted in the minds of humanity to keep it from successfully navigating the testing times.